Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, March 19th, 2024, and this evening the state of Ohio held their statewide primaries for the presidential election, for congressional elections, for the Senate election, and our focus today is on the GOP primary for the U.S. Senate election this coming November, in which whoever wins tonight's primary will face off against incumbent Democrat Sherrod Brown this coming November. The U.S. Senate race is one that you have seen Democrats and Republicans align on one thing. The Trump wing of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party want Donald Trump's choice for the Republican nomination to be the eventual nominee for this coming November election. Democrats have spent nearly $3 million in a last-minute ad buy for Bernie Moreno, who at the time, now the Republican nominee for Senate, is somebody who Republicans and Democrats independently wanted for vastly different reasons. And Democrats look at this race as a prime opportunity for them to pick up the pace and pick up from where they left off back in the 2022 midterm elections. I'm sure many of us remember how Democrats spent tens of millions of dollars amplifying far-right and extremist candidates in 9 competitive swing states that eventually resulted in significant victories for the Democratic Party across battleground states like Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, and yes, even Ohio. Democrats used their funds to boost Republicans who were ultimately less electable this general election, many of them accompanied by an endorsement from President Trump. The same can be said this time around. And in the Ohio GOP primary now, Bernie Moreno, the Donald Trump endorsed candidate, has won a resounding victory over Matt Dolan, who currently serves as a state senator in the state of Ohio. The Secretary of State, Frank LaRose, came in third place with just shy of under 18 percentage points across the GOP primary, with nearly the majority of the vote going to Bernie Moreno and increasing as the night has gone on. And so with Bernie Moreno's victory in tonight's Ohio GOP primary, Ohio is back on the table for the Democratic Party. Why is that? Because Bernie Moreno has been embroiled in scandals since the moment he launched his campaign. He's someone who is often associated with January 6th. He's somebody who is associated with extremist ideology in reference to the state. It's very similar to what we've seen in previous elections, where Democrats have nominated by funding a Trump-endorsed candidate, so they have the means to be the nominee for whatever competitive race here. And then as they get closer to the election, more and more controversies arise, more and more scandals arise, and all of it, Democrats, were largely sitting on in their opposition research dump, in their opposition research drive, whatever you want to call it. And they know that these are things they will use against the candidate should they make it through the nomination, and tonight, Bernie Moreno did. And so what happened here now is that Bernie Moreno, as the candidate that Democrats want to run and want him to be this nominee, their wishes have come true. But they also have come through for President Trump, who endorsed him and held a rally for him just days ago, in which Donald Trump came to Ohio to turn out the base for Bernie Moreno. Fortunately for him, he was running alongside the same ballot that Donald Trump was on in the GOP primary, Donald Trump receiving 79% of the vote across the state of Ohio, winning every single county. But what we see here in the U.S. Senate race is that while Bernie Moreno did, in fact, underperform President Trump, he still trounced his Republican opponents. So what does this mean for the general election? We're talking a lot about how Democrats want him, and we're talking about how he's embroiled in scandals, but is this actually resulting in anything that's benefiting the Democratic Party? The answer is absolutely yes. Let's take a look at where Donald Trump and Joe Biden are in the state of Ohio this coming November election. Today, the RCP average, the Real Clear polling average, shows Donald Trump with a 10-point lead, 52-42, against President Biden. This lead here is one that is accompanied by very, very strong crosstabs for President Trump, improvements from both the 2016 and 2020 presidential election. All in all, these numbers here at face value mean Republicans are doing well in Ohio. But the question is this translating to victories in the Ohio Senate race? Well, the story would be different if Matt Dolan, the state senator who was running for this seat, was the nominee for U.S. Senate. What we see here is that Sherrod Brown does lead him on average, but by a pretty narrow amount. Sherrod Brown has a lead of just 1.3% on average. The most recent poll from East Carolina University shows Matt Dolan defeating Sherrod Brown by roughly 2 points. Survey USA shows Brown ahead by 3, and The Hill and Emerson College also show Sherrod Brown ahead by 3. But that's very different than what we're seeing on the presidential. Donald Trump's ahead by 10, 8, and 12, and Sherrod Brown is leading in some or narrowly losing in others. So what does this tell us about Sherrod Brown? Sherrod Brown is a strong candidate. Sherrod Brown was elected way back when. He's had consistent elections in which he's had strong performances in multiple instances. In 2006, he won against now the governor Mike DeWine by 12.3%. In 2012, he won by 6 points against Josh Mandel, who actually ran for Senate back in 2022. In 2018, Sherrod Brown won against Jim Renacki, who was a person who had been elected statewide before, and it was a margin of victory of 7 percentage points. This is a state that had voted for Trump just 2 years prior to this election by 8.1%. And so the Democrats know they have a strong candidate running again in 2024. Sherrod Brown easily won, the nominating contest in Ohio. That was not even a question by any metric. Nobody even decided to run against him here. But Democrats know they have a strong candidate. And so what that meant was, in order for them to outpace Donald Trump's 10-point advantage, Republicans need a lackluster candidate. Did that come with Matt Dolan? Evidently a little bit, right? There are still voters out there, a significant chunk of the electorate here that wants Brown over Dolan, even deciding that they want Trump over Biden by 10 to 12 points. But the numbers actually get a lot worse than this when you look at them versus Bernie Moreno. The same electorate that chooses Sherrod Brown by 1, chooses Donald Trump by 10, chooses Sherrod Brown by 5 over Bernie Moreno. Why? Because these scandals that have been raised and these reasons for why Democrats want Bernie Moreno to be the nominee are already points of concerns for the Ohio electorate. The voters in this state already know, to an extent, that Bernie Moreno has scandals, that he's plagued by this being associated with him, and largely treat him as someone who they want in the U.S. Senate less than Sherrod Brown, less than they want Donald Trump in the Oval Office. While Bernie Moreno might be the Trump-endorsed candidate, I can't help but think also about those Trump-endorsed candidates from 2018 who ultimately ended up losing a number of states. People like Lou Barletta in Pennsylvania, or Patrick Morrisey in West Virginia, or Jim Renacki in the state of Ohio. These are people here who have received endorsements. Matt Rosendale from Donald Trump received endorsements, campaigned with Donald Trump in the 2018 midterm elections. But voters here, Trump-included voters, right? Trump voters here also agree with the Democratic base, with this independent base, that these Democratic senators are here to stay. And that's exactly why you're seeing such better numbers, much better numbers for Sherrod Brown against Bernie Moreno. That's why you're seeing him up by 5 on average when Trump is up by 10. A 15-point swing doesn't happen easily. This much party crossover and party split ticket voting does not happen without consistency in electoral history, popularity, and pretty darn good constituent services. Sherrod Brown is in a very strong position because the voters in his state like him. They do not like Bernie Moreno. And Democrats knew that. And while Donald Trump's endorsement absolutely helped, I'm not here to try to take this away from Trump or the Make America Great Again wing of the party. The establishment wing of the Ohio GOP lost today, and probably one of the first times they've really lost in this state. Even back in 2016, Ohio went to John Kasich instead of Donald Trump. And in elections afterwards, Donald Trump's endorsements in the primaries weren't always indicative of who would end up winning the GOP primary. He wasn't the person who was dictating these races really until 2022, and even then, J.D. Vance narrowly crossed the finish line. But this time, it's different. It wasn't a narrow crossing of the finish line. It was a resounding victory for Bernie Moreno, who ran for Senate back in 2022, couldn't get the Trump endorsement, and decided to drop out of the race, and now is back and very much doing better. Now Bernie Moreno will be facing off against Sherrod Brown in this general election. And now Democrats are looking at this as a success. Again, they're reminded that their meddling in the GOP primaries in 2022 did in fact result in strong Democratic performances in House elections, Senate elections, gubernatorial elections. That's how these things work. It's a high risk, but for Democrats, high reward. Looking back at the 2022 Senate races here, when we see where Democrats did meddle, they even meddled in states like Ohio, which they ultimately ended up losing, right? Tim Ryan was not a Democratic incumbent who was popular and had the same level of reach as Sherrod Brown and had just come off from a very competitive House election. But Tim Ryan, ended up getting within 6 points, 2 points narrower than the Donald Trump victory in 2020. Why was that? Because J.D. Vance was a lackluster candidate. Did it, help that there was going to be an open race here and that Republicans were pretty much the incumbents at this time? Absolutely. That's why J.D. Vance won by 6 points. But Sherrod Brown is in a better position. He's popular. He's, doing well in the polls, and he's significantly outperforming President Biden poll after poll after poll. And it's hard to see how that changes dramatically, given that he outperformed Obama, he outperformed Democrats in prior, elections, John Kerry, Hillary Clinton, whatever it might be. He is that guy. And he's been able to do well in the state of Ohio. He's been able to do well historically. And what that tells me is that he's the person who can win in 2024. But again, back to this point of 2022, I told you to look at it for a reason because I think it's interesting. What I see here is that Democrats meddling in elections. For instance, when they put forth all of this money and backing behind candidates like Herschel Walker, people like him, who they invested in House races and Senate races and governor races, like Dr. Oz. When you see Democrats running ads under these fake, Save America type PAC firms saying these people are too conservative, they're too make America great again, they're too aligned with Donald Trump, that is a sign, a very clear one even, that Democrats are trying to meddle in the race because it means this is the person they want to run against, right? The only reason why you would ever spend money in a way at all talking about your candidate in a primary in a way that could benefit them is if you want them to win that primary, and that's exactly what you're seeing here. They're not appealing to Republicans by saying he's too extreme, vote against him. No, not at all. This is about getting those extreme voters to vote for their extreme candidate. And then people like Dr. Oz become the nominee and lose. People like Blake Masters become the nominee and lose. People like Herschel Walker become the nominee and lose. That's how this works. The governor's race, it's even more and more apparent. Donald Trump was directly invested in Kari Lake's victory here, but so were Democrats. Katie Hobbs ended up winning. In the state of Kansas, Democrats wanted it to be Derek Schmidt. What happened? Democrats won. In Maine even, Paul LePage, who sure had been governor before, but referred to himself as the Trump before Trump. Yeah, no, they wanted him for sure, lost by 13 points. In Michigan, Tudor Dixon, Democrats wanted her. What happened? She lost by 11 points. I mean, it is clear here that what Democrats did was intentionally boost people. This is the most apparent case of it, I think, honestly, reflecting back on that election, Pennsylvania in the 2022 governor election. Democrats were constantly making quote-unquote attack ads against Doug Mastriano. But what that did there was rile up the conservative base and say, these Democrats hate him, so therefore I love him. But the voters in the general election very clearly did not. And so it's sort of like this 4D chess move where Democrats are aligning themselves with Trump in one way, meddling in the primary, spending millions of dollars on this guy for a reason. Because maybe, just maybe, their internal numbers are matching our external numbers. The lead here for Sherrod Brown by 5 points amongst the same group of people that prefer Sherrod Brown by just 1, this is the same electorate, tells us everything we need to know. There are weaker candidates for U.S. Senate. And tonight, one of the weakest was chosen. From the very beginning, from the moment that Bernie Moreno announced his bid, Democrats had their sights set. Because he is someone who has been caught up in scandal after scandal. Bernie Moreno, just quite frankly, is not this super strong candidate. People knew that, and people are showing that in the polls. I think when you're seeing, discrimination lawsuits from when he was a businessman, or, different circumstances in which you are seeing him involved, still up in the air right now about, whether or not this will actually matter to voters as much, but involved in these scandals. And even Republican opposition research that has just been released days ago. I mean, we talked about Bernie Moreno's scandal of him being supposedly, this is not confirmed or denied, but this is not, I guess it has been denied by the campaign. It's not confirmed here, but what we're seeing here is that Bernie Moreno's email was used to sign up for an adult dating site as a married man. I mean, these are scandals that do pop up, but a lot of it has been fielded by Republican research, Democratic research, but Democrats want it to be him because this is the type of thing that they want to see leak before the election. These are the types of things they want to see dug up and used against him. He wasn't chosen by pulling a name out of a hat and deciding they were going to go all in for this candidate. He, quite frankly, based on the numbers, based on the scandals, based on every metric, is the least electable Republican here. Now, we look at those numbers for Frank LaRose, and I honestly would say, well, I do think, he wasn't going to do well in the general election. I think Bernie Moreno, I think Democrats have a little bit more up their sleeve from what they're initially letting on, right? I think they've pulled back from the opposition research because it was only going to help candidates that weren't him in this election. Frank LaRose has his own baggage, association with Issue 1 and other things that he's, caught up with in this election cycle, which is why he, didn't do well in the GOP primary. But what we're seeing here is that Bernie Moreno, I think Democrats got their wish this evening. And based on the numbers that we are seeing, compared to what we're seeing on the presidential, I'd be happy if I was a Democrat. I'd be, celebrating this victory. Because although there is that high risk that electing an extremist to the U.S. Senate is still a very strong possibility given that this is Ohio and that Donald Trump is ahead by 10 points in the state. I will also say that in 2022, this paid off. And more likely than not, a Matt Dolan senator versus a Senator Bernie Moreno probably were going to vote the same way when it came down to the U.S. Senate and in opposition to the Democratic Party. But we will see what happens. Because with this victory now for Democrats and also the Make America Great Again Republicans in Ohio, time will tell about whether or not this was a large mistake, because I would say it was a rather big one. But of course, as we get closer and closer to election season, more and more information will be released, more and more scandals will break, and it will be a very fascinating and riveting election season in the Ohio Senate race this coming November. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.